if you're an IoT manufacturer, a device manufacturer, what's the carbon footprint of the devices you're making? And we've gone through the Echo devices and the Fire devices that Amazon makes, the Alexa and Fire TV devices, and we've done two things.
Hello and welcome to another Coffee with Mr. IT. My name is Robert Schmidt and I'm Deloitte's Chief IoT Technologist. Today, my guest for the show is Adrian Cockcroft, and he's the VP of Sustainability Architecture at Amazon. It's a great pleasure to have you, Adrian. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Doing fine, thanks.
Adrian, I gotta ask you, let's start with sustainability. What does that mean to you? And, I looked through your very prolific, I was very impressed with everything you write. Writing is my thing. So I was sort of like, wow, there's someone who writes a lot. But what does sustainability mean to you, particularly where you came from? You worked in Unix, you worked at a variety of different things. Tell me a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, I got into it mostly of interest a decade or more ago, 10, 15 years ago. So I started out, I have a physics degree, so I've always been tracking the science of things, and climate change in particular was a discussion like 15 years ago, quite a lot of discussion, probably around the time that Al Gore did his movie on Inconvenient Truth. It's around that time, a lot of discussion. And I kind of got into it then, decided I needed to study it enough to decide what I thought, and realized that there was a lot going on there. So I've been tracking it from a climate point of view for quite a while. But I've been a technologist working mostly at the leading edge of new technologies. That's through my whole career, when the initial migrations to Unix, to the internet, to large-scale personalization systems. I was with Netflix for a long time. And then when Netflix moved to the cloud, I was the architect for quite a bit of the transition that we did there. So basically, I've spent the last decade or so telling people how Netflix moved to the cloud, how to do digital transformation, what is all this DevOps and a bunch of other things, microservices, cloud computing, all those buzzwords. We kind of figured that out about 10 years ago. And now it's those have become relatively well understood. So the next thing that looked new and interesting to me was sustainability transformation. So rather than a digital transformation, which you can think of, well, the internet happened to you, you're now directly to your customer, connected to your customers, and you think everything you've made, which is sort of IoT, what do you do next? That sort of digital transformation. Sustainability is, well, all the energy you use now needs to be renewable. Your product lines need to be made out of renewable materials. That's a whole product line transformation for a huge amount of the industry. So I've decided that that's kind of the next thing to go focus on that looks interesting. So about March this year, I switched over to the central sustainability team at Amazon, where I'm responsible for the AWS, sort of interfacing that team into AWS and helping AWS and its customers understand what does a sustainability transformation look like.
So I don't know, maybe it's just me, but the irony to talk about climate change and then talk about the cloud as a way to help sustainability, somehow that feels ironic to me. But whenever we talk about the cloud in the past, I thought of, unlimited capacity, more secure, those kind of things. It didn't immediately occur to me that there was a huge sustainability component to that. And yet, doing a little research before, there's some amazing numbers you have about the cloud, and in particular AWS, and the changes you make when you move from your own data center to the cloud. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I love the numbers. They're just so powerful.
Yeah, so the best thing you can do to make yourself more sustainable from an energy use point of view is higher utilization. And what the cloud does is it gathers together all the customers into one place. And when you're not using machines, somebody else uses it. So you don't have a lot of idle hardware sitting around like you do in a data center. And we see that just much, much higher utilization in the cloud. And we have some reports we've done on this, but basically the carbon footprint, basically we're 88% lower in terms of carbon footprint than a median data center. There was a survey of typical data centers, and it's mostly the utilization gain. Then when you take into account the carbon footprint of a typical data center versus AWS, back in 2019, it's a 3.6 times better from a carbon footprint point of view. So, and that was in 2019. In 2019, at the end of 2019, we announced we had about 2 gigawatts of energy purchases, renewable energy purchases for Amazon. And now, in the end of 2020, that was about 6 gigawatts. And we announced in April we're up to 8.5 gigawatts. So we're now the biggest purchaser of renewable energy in the world. Amazon is. We're also the biggest in Europe. We have about 2.5 gigawatts in Europe, and that's the largest corporate purchaser of energy in Europe. And we have a fair amount more to go. We don't have enough capacity yet. But that's for all of Amazon. It's not just the AWS cloud piece. And you've got to understand that the physical business of Amazon is actually much larger carbon footprint than AWS in the data centers. So we're covering it as one large, sort of doing everything together in a more holistic way rather than breaking out the individual pieces.
If I remember this right, did I remember this right? On average, the on-prem data center is only about 3% utilized. Is that sort of like the number that I remember right?
It depends, but it's somewhere in the single digits is pretty common. If you do really well, you can get it up to 10, 15, 20%, but it's really hard to do that because you need enough capacity to handle whatever your highest peak of workload will ever be. And so you end up having a lot in reserve. And in the cloud, you're sharing that, you're basically statistical averaging. You just get you get a much, much higher average utilization in the cloud. It's many times better. It's my rough guess is it's 3 times to 5 times higher utilization in the cloud if you're doing it well. You can certainly use the cloud in an inefficient way by just allocating machine and not using it. And you can go clean those things up. But if you're auto scaling to workloads, so when traffic comes in, you have machines, and when it isn't there, you don't need them. Some of the interesting workloads that really only make sense in the cloud are sort of flash sales. Like at a certain point time of day, you're going to go and there's going to be a deal, and everyone charges in to take care of that deal. And then it might be over in minutes or an hour or two. And then, you allocate a huge amount of resources for a very short period of time. But the other times, those machines are in use by somebody else. So that's kind of the thing that generates the utilization. You're responsible for the machines you've allocated, not the number of machines that are in the building, basically.
So you said that energy is a part of that in terms of climate and energy consumption and so forth. What are the other things? So there is all these other ways of being sustainable, because energy and climate is one aspect of this. What are the other sustainable areas that you look at? And I'm particularly curious, Amazon is interesting in this. We have so many different areas, right? But what do you do around sensors and knowledge and information you gather through other means you have through your network?
Yeah. The other main ones, I think probably after energy, is water. So we have a big program about water use and recycling water and being very careful about the water that we consume as a business. Then there's basically zero landfill is the goal. You don't want to send anything to landfill, so that's zero waste. And it's typically also called circular economy. So how do you recycle things? How do you make sure you generate less waste and that it goes to the right place? So there's a lot of things going on in that space. the sustainability organization, which is run by Kara Hurst at Amazon, she's been running it for a long time, also includes social responsibility, which worries about the supply chain, factories, labor conditions, things like that. So that's also comes underneath the overall area of what's usually called ESG, right? Environmental, social, and governance. We have all of those sort of combined together. And we care a lot about the supply chain, like where are products made, what's the carbon footprint of that, what are the labor practices there of all of the places where everything is made in the world that turns up on the Amazon retail site. So there's teams working on all of those things. Now going to your other point about how do we measure this, for example, if you think about the delivery vehicles, right now they're diesel trucks driving around, and we know roughly how many miles they do. We know how much diesel fuel we put in them, and we're tracking the routes and things. But what we're going to be moving to in the future is electric trucks, and we have a deal with Rivian in the US and with Mercedes in Europe to do electric trucks. And with them, you can measure much more detail, right? So from them, the truck is always connected. It's telling you how many kilowatts it took, from point to point. It's much easier to measure than a gasoline, or diesel truck. They are just designed to be connected and optimized for those purposes. So we're getting more and more detailed information about the delivery. Exactly how much energy is used for each individual delivery, rather than it being sort of an average. We can get down to more detail. So those are the kind of things where, as we build systems that are more connected, we can start getting data out of them that we can use to help optimize the business and understand where everything is going, from an energy use point of view, as well as and then we can turn that into a carbon footprint from there.
So I find it interesting. I had two thoughts, and you pick up any one you'd like. But first of all, my wife says I'm an Amazon addict because whenever I don't order for a couple of days, she thinks you guys sent me an email to remind me that I haven't forgotten about you. But I buy a lot of stuff on Amazon, and what that means is I have a really bad habit. I hate this, like taking apart the cardboards. So, but what ends up happening to me, and in my mind, is it's a really difficult thing to look at sustainability as Amazon its own, because at the end of the day, if I buy an Amazon package, that means I'm not driving to a store and I'm not putting carbon oxide stuff into the air. But I actually leverage what you do with driving one truck around and dropping to everybody off. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that? How do you look at that? And I think my second question for you is, why does it matter to me? Why should I care as an employee and as a person around sustainability? Because, it feels a little, it's not as measurable as profit, return on investment, stock market and so forth. Where do I see my sustainability benefits from your point of view? Help me on that. And I actually be curious to see if what you're telling is sort of aligning with how I feel and how I explain my moral compass around this. I'm sure you get asked that a lot.
Yeah, on the first part, and certainly we've done some studies to show that if you don't go and, if you drive to the shops, it certainly is going to consume more energy than if we get a delivery on average. It obviously depends how far you're going and things like that. There's some things that you can do to optimize that as an Amazon customer. And one of them is you can set a delivery day, which will cause all of the things that you order when you remember you need them to be gathered together and delivered at the same time.
It's the Amazon day, you call it, right?
Yeah. So there's a way to optimize that. So it'll be packaged in fewer containers and there's fewer trips. So if you really are trying to optimize your carbon footprint with the deliveries, and you can put up with things not all, and then you can also have a day when somebody's at home is the other reason that it would be useful for people. There's certain days that are more convenient than others for deliveries. So it's got two good purposes there. We've also been optimizing the packaging themselves. We're always trying to optimize the cardboard boxes. I find the Amazon boxes are easy to pull apart, like the tape is designed to break more easily, right? They're actually easier to get flat and stuck in the recycle than some of the other boxes I get. And you notice the cardboard's a bit thinner than some of the others, and then there's a bunch of packages that we have which are designed to be shipped without being in a box. And there's a whole program we have with our suppliers to make packages that are either, see, the retail package is often quite big so that it's big on the shelf so you see it. But when it's coming in a box, there's actually shipping optimized packages that are much more compact, they're as small as they need to be. And that uses less cardboard in the packaging, but it also means we can pack more in. It just saves money all the way through the supply chain because you're not trying to attract somebody's attention on a shelf in a store. So there's some optimization there. So there's a lot going on here, a lot of research to minimize the waste in the packaging side of things. So that's part of the program. From the second part of your question, there's a few different things here. The team that Carol's built up over the years in Amazon Sustainability is a very mission-driven team. There are people that care about this. We have some amazing resumes, people that have worked in government, in the White House, people that wrote some of the standards that people adhere to, like the building standards like LEED, some of the, you're just talking to somebody, oh yeah, well, when they were working in the White House, a decade ago, or when they were doing this and that. So it's an amazing group of people, and they are people that have worked in public policy to make things happen. And then they're coming to work in industry to continue to make things happen, but with the leverage of happening at the scale of Amazon. So one of the reasons that I joined Amazon, and many people join, is just the leverage the company gives us. Like if you can make something happen at Amazon, it has a huge impact. And then through AWS, we reach most of the companies in the world, most of the organizations in the world are likely to be customers of AWS. So what I'm thinking about in terms of sustainability transformation, if I can find the leaders and the innovators in a particular industry who figured out how to be more sustainable, and then I can take that to the majority of people in that industry and get them to move a bit faster, move a bit more easily and quickly, then that makes a big difference to the industry. So I think that it's the mission level here is that we just can affect the outcomes in a significant way across the world. And that's kind of what I think makes most of us kind of want to be involved in this particular area.
Have you set yourself a sort of goal? Would probably not make sense, but I have to believe what you work at must have a time frame that's different from some other things. But then again, you were there when Unix was early on, so maybe for you time frame is a little different. But what sort of how do you look at this from a personal point of view, where you go and say, well, I'd like to see this kind of change or this kind of movement to sort of, that gives you personally sort of like the satisfaction around this. What do you do around this? I'd be curious.
I tend to try to get into things when they're emerging and poorly understood. And that's, it's ambiguous, it's complicated, it's frustrating, but there's all these things that, well, this isn't right. And there's stuff that doesn't work yet because it's emerging. And it's something that has been, it's not like climate change or sustainability is a new thing, but it's becoming something that's much more topical right now. And a lot of people trying to figure out what is their carbon footprint. A lot of companies are trying to figure it out. We're starting to see government regulation that's standardizing kind of what people have to do. So it's becoming top of mind in a lot of places. So that's kind of why now. And then there's all these clear needs that people haven't figured out. It's very difficult to measure carbon footprint. The supply chains aren't instrumented for doing it. The devices aren't instrumented. I was talking to somebody who works on one of the real-time operating systems and says, well, would it be good if the operating system just reported the energy use of the thing? And said, oh yeah, that'd be a good idea, but it's not there, right? It's not a standard thing. It's something you have to add every time you build an IoT device. You'd have to add in, this is how it measures its power usage and its carbon footprint rather than it being built in. So I think what I typically see is for the first few years, people are still getting their head around it. And then and there's sort of, you start off with it as an emerging idea, and then you go into the skills shortage phase where everyone suddenly tries to hire the tiny number of people that actually know how to do this. I think we're likely to get into that in the next year or two. And then it'll become something that's more socialized. There are tools, people know how to do it. It becomes less of a hot button. There's new keywords. We saw this with things like microservices and DevOps and chaos engineering. There's now an industry of many startups around chaos engineering, which is sort of a destructive testing methodology where you go in and make sure things work by proving that they work under stress. Those things in the early days were just confusing people, getting upset, people arguing about the definition of the words, right? So you move on after a while and say, okay, like this word, we now agree this word is just a label for the thing. We're not going to argue about what you called it. So I think in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll get to a point where this is becoming a normal part of the way most companies run. And people will be driving towards their sort of 2025 targets. That's one of the years that a lot of people are shooting at. Like, what are you going to do in the next three to 4 years that's going to deliver in 2025? For Amazon, we're looking at having 100% renewable energy capacity by 2025. But that's at the same time that we're also converting a lot of buildings from gas heat to electric heat. And we're converting a lot of our vehicles from diesel to electric. So we're increasing our electricity use enormously at the same time as we're going to 100% renewable supply around the world. So that's kind of a short-term goal. If you think a lot of the sustainability goals people talk about the Paris Agreement. Okay, it's just 2050. So you go to a company and say, what's your 2050 goal? And the executive says, okay, I'll give you a bonus if you do something in 2050, right? It's like, you're not going to be working there. It doesn't make any sense, right? How do you incent somebody to deliver something 30 years from now? Mm-hmm. So you have to have shorter term goals. So the company has to still be there and deliver in 2050. And so we have a climate pledge that brought it into 2040. So this is the Amazon Climate Pledge. We've said that our goal is 2040, not 2050, and including all of the supply chain, what's called Scope 3 emissions, and with science-based targets and progresses along the way. So we have interim goals for 2030 and 2025, because 2025 is plausible. If you're talking to a management team, you can say, we need to deliver this 2025. That means you need to start now and really make a difference for it. But 2050 just seems like, I can promise anything in 2050. I'll be happy if I'm still alive in 2050. It's kind of a lot of senior management, right? It's far enough in the future that you see empty promises for those kinds of things. So you have to kind of work back to what can be short term. What can you actually concretely do right now?
So we're kind of coming to the end of what time you gave us, but I was curious to hear about, I know you just bought the house a year ago or changed it, and so I'm sure there's some super interesting things there. But really, let me ask you this to close and hear your thoughts on what can I and what can individual listeners here do today that really makes a difference in this case. And I say this because it's so interesting to me and so timely. Today, I received an email from our CEO, Puneet, who talked about how the Gen X and the millennials really have a different expectation to the companies they work for, right? It's not just about profits and shareholder value anymore. It's really what impact do I make and so forth. And so I want to bring this back to the individual. What can I do to make a difference in addition to picking one Amazon delivery day? And what do you do? What can we individually do to help?
Yeah, I think there's a few different areas. If you own a house, then the investments you make in the house are a big piece of this. So most people now know, okay, put on solar panels, get an electric car, those kinds of things are getting fairly common. The sort of emerging things, which are a little harder to do, are to basically shut down the gas pipe coming into your house, stop having any need to burn gas, right? We're seeing new buildings that are now being set up that have no gas supply. At the Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle, we've been rebuilt that. That's got no gas supply to it anymore. The HQ2 building we're building in near Washington, D.C., there's no gas into those buildings. They're 100% electric. So if you look at your own house, one of the problems people have is something like, a furnace blows up or stops working. It's like, fix this now. It's usually cold, right? You want to just get the first one you can find off the shelf, plug it straight in. So most replacements are done on an emergency basis. It's one of the things you can do if you plan it is say, okay, I'm going to put in an electric heat pump. It's a little more money. It's a little more time. You have to plan it. But it's one of the biggest things you can do and then you'll see your gas bill go to basically near zero, and it'll be replaced by electric, which you can offset with solar panels. So you can get to a very low carbon, low energy footprint for a house. That applies to hot water tanks as well, the heat furnaces. So that's something if you own a house. If for the other things we buy, if you go to Amazon and search, you'll see a little tick box on the left side that we introduced on Earth Day this year in April, climate pledge friendly. You can just tick that box and you'll see all the things that we can sell, that you can buy, that we've gone through and made sure are climate pledge friendly. They're sustainable. And it's, a lot of consumer packaged goods, all kinds of soaps and things like that, things that you consume a lot of. They're in very sustainable packaging and they are sourced sustainably. And then finally, if you think about devices, if you're an IoT manufacturer, a device manufacturer, what's the carbon footprint of the devices you're making? And we've gone through the Echo devices and the Fire devices that Amazon makes, the Alexa and Fire TV devices. And we've done two things. One is just optimize them to be sustainable. They have a much lower power consumption. When they're idle, they go to a more lower power state. We're making them out of more renewable plastic and metal and all the components that go in them. And then we also went and did an offset deal where we look at the energy use of all of the devices that we have installed everywhere. So if you have an Amazon device somewhere in your house, we are offsetting the energy use of that device for you. So Amazon is buying like renewable energy credits, basically, or offsetting credits to offset the footprint of all the devices that we've already sold. So that's something, if you're a device manufacturer, you might want to look into both cutting the energy and then buying credits, because obviously if you build really low energy devices, you don't have to pay so much for the credits. So it's kind of built in like this incentive program for you. But I think that's something you can do personally, and also something as a device builder, as an IoT producer. Make sure the things you design record their energy footprint and optimize for it. And that'll help a lot around the world.
I realized listening to you talking about the check marks that are following the climate pledge or are climate pledge friendly, I think were the words you used. I'm like wishing that the labeling come into effect that actually tells me on the label in some meaningful way how climate pledge friendly it is. But I know that's going to get a political conversation, which I don't want to get into, but it'd be really nice to know.
I think we're headed in that direction. I think a lot of people want to know what is the carbon footprint of devices and products, and it's just hard to get to. And this is an emerging area. I think in a few years' time, you'll see something like that.
Adrian, any closing thoughts? Any super fascinating conversation?
I think, and just going back to the climate pledge, we have over 100 companies that have signed up to the climate pledge. A lot in Europe, a lot in the US, lots of different industries. We have Alaska Airlines, Visa, Siemens, a lot of IoT there. Microsoft joined. So it's across lots of different industries, lots of areas, and we have 100 people so far we've announced. We have new people signing up all the time, so we keep announcing them in batches. What it requires is science-based targets 10 years early than Paris Agreement, and you figured out what your scope 3 is. That's pretty much it. You get your CEO to write a letter promising that you're going to do these things, and you're in the climate pledge. And this is a way to identify the organizations that are leaders and innovators in this space. And they'll be the ones that we use as examples as we look to developing the patterns and sustainability transformation kind of approaches that will work out across these other industries. So that's just think about what it would take. You can go find, there's a website, Global Optimism run a website for us. But if you go to the Amazon website and find the sustainability pages, there's a big section now on climate pledge, and there's a link, and you can just fill in a form and kind of register your interest in this. So a little call to action for everybody there. If you think that you're in line with that set of commitments, then we should just get everybody, into that. It makes it clear that you're a leader in this space.
Adrian, thank you for what you do. Thank you for what Amazon does. And it gave me a nice kick to up my sustainability efforts. And so with that, I want to say thanks for another great contribution. Thanks for watching. And with that, we have another coffee chat coming to an end. Hope you're having a great day. If you missed any of today's show, please check out the playlist or podcast. And also you'll find there all our previous shows.